you skip all the way to the end of the PARSHA, so to speak, you find the mitzvah of Tefiillin is given as a zikaron, as a remembrance, as a symbol of the Jewish people being taken out of Egypt. The first source on the page is the last pasuk in Parshas Bo. This shall be for a sign on your hand, and totafot, I didn't translate, it's a tricky word to translate, beini necha. It's referring to the tefillin that we wear on our arm and the tefillin that we wear on our heads. Ki b'chozek yad hotzianu Hashem mitzrayim, because with a mighty hand God took us out of Egypt. That is not the only time the Torah mentions tefillin in this parsha. If you turn back a few psukim earlier, you have a very similar verse. Sounds almost exactly the same. Because with a mighty hand, so tefillin comes up twice in the parsha. So the Gemara asks a very basic question. And the Gemara says, when we put tefillin on our arms, right? It says yadcha, but here it means the arm. It doesn't just mean the hand. When you put tefillin on your arm, which arm do you put it on?
Left.
Left or right?
Depends on if you're left or right.
Depends if you're left or right. So the real answer seems to be that you put it on your left. If you're lefty, so then things get reversed. But it really goes on the left. So that's source number 2. The Gemara in Mesechus Menachot. The Gemara quotes Reb Nassan, and he says, how do I know that you put tefillin on the left? Eino tzarach, I don't need your reason. Harehu omer, if you look in the psukim, in the verses in Sefer Dvarim, you'll see ukshartam uchsaftam. The Torah says you should tie, referring to the way that we wrap the tefillin. Uchsaftam, and you should write them, referring to the scrolls that are inside. Ma ksiva biyamin, just like the writing of a Sefer Torah, the writing of tefillin, the writing of mezuzah is done with the right hand on most people. Most people are righties. So just like the writing is done with the right hand, so too the kshira, so too the tying of the tefillin, the hand that we use to wrap the tefillin, should be the right hand. If that's true, the kevan, the kshira, biyamin, the Gemara says, since it's true that tying the tefillin is done with the right hand, so it must be hanacha b'smol. It's almost impossible to tie tefillin onto the arm that you're tying them with. So you tie the tefillin with the right hand, you must be tying them to the left arm. So for most people, for all the righties in the room, the tefillin are tied on the left arm. So says the Gemara. Rav Yossi Achorim hanacha tibismol minale. He learns it from the same place. And then in the last line, Rav Ashi Amar. Rav Ashi says, I'll tell you a different source. He says, mi yadcha, from the word that's bolded in source number 1, from your hand. Yadcha, yud dalid chav hey. Ksiv behei, it's written with a hey, kehei. It should be written keha, in Hebrew means weak. And a person who is a righty, his left hand is going to be weaker than his right, and that's the hand that it's put on. So what the Gemara is driving at here is the following. If you look at the 2 verses which we began with that mention the mitzvah of tefillin in our parsha, if you look at those 2 verses, the first one spells yadcha, yud daled chaf sofi, yud daled chaf. And the second time the Torah writes the word yadcha, your hand, to put the tefillin on, it writes yud daled chaf hey. I hope everyone can envision that. You can see yadcha in bold in source number 1, but the first time it's with a chaf sofit, there's no hey at the end. So what is the reason that the first time it's written what we call chaser, it's written in its shorter form, and the second time it's written malay with the hey on the end, in its fuller form? So the Gemara says, yadcha has that chaf hey on the end of it, it's like kehei, it's like weaker, and that's referring to the weakness of a person's weaker hand, which is the left, and that's the hand we put our tefillin on. So this is a very strange halacha. Because if you think about it, most mitzvos that we do, most actions that the Torah commands us to do, the Torah commands us to do with our stronger hand, with our right hand. And we could give a list of a lot of examples. I'm sure people can think of some some of them on their own. First of all, like the Gemara here had already referenced, when you write a Sefer Torah, if a person's a righty, they're supposed to write it with the right hand. If a person writes on Shabbos, which you're not supposed to do, and they write with the left hand instead of the right, that's considered a shinui. That's not malacha, that's not work on Shabbos in its purest form. But the Kohen does work in the Beit Midrash. He's supposed to use his right hand. He's not supposed to use his left. So question number 1 for tonight is, we have in our Parsha these two contrasting spellings of Yadcha, which teach you that we put the Tefiillin on the left hand. And the question is, why, as opposed to other mitzvos that we normally do with our right hand, do we put Tefiillin on our left arm? That's question number 1. Okay. If you look in source number 3, we'll ask a second question. Vayosha Hashem bayomahu. Now let's skip ahead to next week's Parsha, jump into those psukim that we're familiar with from davening, those psukim that lead right up to Az Yashir. Vayosha Hashem bayomahu es Yisrael mi'ad Mitzrayim. At that time, God saved the Jewish people from the hands of Egypt. Vayar Yisrael es Mitzrayim meis al sfas hayam. And the Jewish people see the Egyptians dying on the banks of the river. Verse 31, Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Vayar Yisrael es hayad hagdolah. And the Jewish people saw the great hand, Asher asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim, that God used in Mitzrayim. Vayiru ha'am es Hashem, the people feared God. Vayaminu Hashem u'Moshe avdo, and they believed in God and Moshe his servant. Does anyone have any problems with Pasuk Lamed Aleph, verse 31? Famous Pasuk, yeah.
The fact that, why did they believe in Hashem after all of these things and not?
Exactly. When you look at these psukim, it should strike you as very funny. This is fast forwarding to next week, but think about where we're holding right now between Parshas Va'ira and Parshas Bo. We are in between these two sets of miracles, these plagues, which are so intense, which are so miraculous, which are so clearly coming from God, that you would think by the time the Jewish people get themselves to this point, of course they would fear God. Even Paro, to a certain extent, fears God. The only reason maybe Paro is still holding strong is because God himself is hardening the heart of Paro. The Egyptian people say to Paro, let these people out of here. We don't want to deal with this anymore. So the Jewish people aren't afraid of God? The Jewish people don't believe in God? It's very strange. We say these psukim every day. When the Jewish people are standing at Yam Suf, when they see what happens, they fear God. When they see what happens at Yam Suf, they believe in God. And the question is, why not earlier? Now, you could tell me that they did. You could say, give me a break. You're taking this too literally. Of course they believed in God before. Right? They believed, the point is, they had this experience where they once again saw God displaying his abilities. But if you look in source 4, you see that that's not true. And this is really, again, more for next week than it is for this week, but it highlights the point. We have this idea in davening. In davening in the morning, we have two primary focuses. One is Shema and one is Shmon Esrei. Right? Kriya Shema Shema Yisrael in the paragraphs that follow, and then the Amidah, the 18, 19 brachos that we say. Those are the two focuses of davening in the morning. Shmon Esrei maybe is a biblical commandment, maybe not. Kriya Shema is a mitzvah d'oraisa, is a commandment from the Torah. But these are the two pillars of davening, the center of our davening. And the Gemara goes at great length to emphasize the point that we're supposed to have them connected with no break. We have to be somech, what they call geula litfila. Geula, redemption, referring to the redemption, the story of the redemption that is in those paragraphs between Shema and Shmon Esrei. And from there you go right into Tefillah, you go right into Shmon Esrei. No breaks in between. Geula litfila. What's in Geula? So there we mention the entire redemption process. So look at this Medrash in Parshas Beshalach, next week's Parsha. Source 4. V'lama tzarech lahaskir kriyas yamsuf be'emes v'yatziv. Emes v'yatziv is that first paragraph after Shema. Why do you have to mention kriyas yamsuf? After all, If we're focusing on Yetzias Mitzrayim, just say what? Just say the way what God did to the Egyptians in Egypt and how the Jewish people got out. What happened afterwards doesn't matter. So the Midrash says, Lefi shekivein shekara lahem es hayam ha'aminu bo. Because when God split the sea for the Jewish people, that is when they believed in Him, not earlier. Shenemar, how do I know this? Because the Torah says itself, Vayaminu b'Hashem u'Moshe avdo. When God performs Kriyas Yamsuf, now we take this guy seriously. Dam tzvardei akinim arov dever shchen, not so impressive. Kriyas Yamsuf, not bad. That's what seems to be going on here. Ubizchos ha'emuna sheheminu, says the Midrash, for the merit that they had this faith in God, zachu lomar shira. That is why they merited in the prophecy that gave them the ability to say Az Yashir. That wasn't something that they came up with on their own, according to the Midrash. That was inspired divinely from above. Vishar Saleim Shechina, and the Spirit of God rested upon them. Shekain Ksiv Acharab, what do we find right after this? They feared God, they believed God. Az Yashir Moshe Bnei Israel. Only then do they experience this moment of Shira. Lakach tzarech adam lismoch geula l'tfila. Therefore, one must be careful to be somich, to juxtapose those paragraphs of Shema and that follow it immediately to Tefillah, to Shemon Esrei itself. Kishem shehem hismichu shira achar ha'emuna ve'hakriya. Just like there was no break between their experience of emuna, their faith, that revelation that occurred at Yam Suf, and they're beginning to say Shira. So Shema, Geula, all of that is the experience of Kriyas Yam Suf, so to speak, the review of what happened, and immediately from there we go into Shemona Esrei, that's the Az Yashir. So that is something that people buy. That is something that people are impressed with. But not 10 makos.
What's the reason that the makos didn't, that the plague beforehand didn't touch them? Is it because they just were so hardened by being slaves and?
So that's a good question. Any thoughts?
I just think it's a different reality. It's a different. It's the plague. You know, it doesn't mean that they didn't have emunah before. They obviously did have emunah. They wouldn't have done what they did. They wouldn't have been so moser nefesh to put the blood on the posts and to do the bris. There was the emunah was there, but there was another level. There was another step that happened at Kriyas Yamsuf.
And the chamushim, according to Rashi, the 80%.
So the 80%. We're not talking about the 80%.
Why not?
Though. We're talking because they were wrong.
Yeah, so but why didn't the makos touch them?
You think that the Yamsuf would have? Like it didn't touch them because they for whatever there are different explanations we can say, but right now we're talking about the 20% that did leave, and somehow that 20% there's something that happened to them at Yamsuf that didn't happen even though they did have the emunah at the 10 plagues. Right. Something happened that it was only at Yamsuf that they were able to have that emunah, Vayimir B'Hashem Moshe Avdo, and they were able to do this.
So per the question, first of all, the assumption, how come they weren't touched by the plague? So you have to ask the question, was there potential for them to be damaged by the plagues or hurt by the plagues? So that might depend plague by plague. Makas Bechoros, we see the Jewish people were called into action. But Dam sounds like they were more than excused. In Mitzrayim selling them with the sale of water back and forth.
I was just going to suggest that was the time when they saw the demise of their taskmasters. Up until then, perhaps they still didn't have faith that things wouldn't turn around against them and they'd be back where they were. But when they saw the taskmasters chase them and sink in the sea at different proportions depending on their involvement in enslavement,
right.
That was a reality that wasn't in Israel.
Okay, we got two more, I think, yeah.
Well, I just wonder whether the fact that the Geula occurred at the Yam Suf, like that was God doing something to them. And the Makos were God doing something to the Mitzrayim.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was no guarantee that that they were going to be going out really up until that last moment. I mean, you say, what about the Chamushim? Well, really, even the 20% that left or the Hamashim that, like the left didn't, they were no different than the 80% that stayed behind. They just had whatever amount of Amunah that took them up to the Yom Suf, and then after that,
Okay.
that's
Oh,
when they said.
last one. Yeah.
I like what the fan says, and
We're going to get back to that. We're going to get back to that. You're machavin something
true,
big.
that's what I thought too. That in the 10 Makot did not affect them. They were in Avdut, and in a very deep Avdut, that they did not see, unfortunately, Hashem. Am Yisrael did not see Hashem.
Right. Interesting. By Makas Bechoro specifically, the death of the firstborns, so that there you start to see involvement. Makas Bechoros doesn't just, after the Psukim say it themselves, that's the truth. Asher Yafleh Hashem Bein Mitzrayim Uvein Yisrael. This will distinguish. And Dam doesn't distinguish between Jews and Egyptians if the Jews are drinking water and the Egyptians can't find it. But Makas Bechoros is when the Jewish people are called upon to act. If you want to defend your Bechorim, you're going to have to you have to slaughter their Avodah Zarah. You'll have to paint that blood on your doorpost. That's really the first time. It doesn't happen right away.
Maybe because also it wasn't a period of a year, and it wasn't so immediate like the parting of the sea, when they were all out, and this is when they saw this is the Geula coming, we are out. Then they were still in during the year, so it wasn't so immediate.
So these are
Also, they didn't have the Torah. Am Yisrael did not get the Torah yet.
right. A big theme from 2 weeks ago.
They're
You have to
not-
really understand what the
Don't
mindset
forget
of these
that.
people was.
They didn't have
Right, but
the-
again, that doesn't mean that they didn't believe in God. Maybe their conception of God, as we'll see, was a little bit different than we might have expected or than they might have expected, but they still believed in God. At least those that came out at least did. Okay, so let's work with Rafal's answer a little bit in source 5. Source 5 comes from the Orach Chaim. In your standard Mikros Gedolos Chumash, you'll find the Orach Chaim's commentary. The Orach Chaim was a Sephardic commentary on the Chumash, who was born, I think, in 1696, the last few years of the 17th century, and he lived to be about 47 into the mid-18th century in Morocco. Originally, he was born in Morocco, and he made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, and that's where he founded Yeshiva, and he wrote a bunch of his commentaries. I think historically Morocco was plagued with famine at that time, and that's partially, I think, what motivated his move to Israel, and he died there. So in his commentary on the Chumash here, he starts with our question on Tefiillin. And the Orach Chaim asks, Rabbeinu Zal Amru Yadcha Yad Kehei Yad Shehu Yad Smol. Our rabbis teach us that the pasuk in our parsha is telling us that we put Tefiillin on our left arm. V'tzarech ladas madua lo bachar Hashem b'yad yamin. You have to ask, you have to wonder, why didn't God choose to have us put the Tefiillin on our right arm? Lasos bo hamitzvah ki hu amshuvach. It's the most praiseworthy, if you will, of the arms. It's the one that we normally do our mitzvos with. V'Rabbeinu amru, and later on in that piece of the Gemara, our sages suggested, Liyoso mechuvan kineged halev shebitzad smol. The Gemara gives that somewhat famous answer that the Tefiillin shal yad should be parallel to the heart. Now, Moshe Feinstein, we'll discuss a little bit later, asks the obvious question, and if you're the lefty, so that answer is not going to suffice even for the Gemara. The Gemara knows it's not going to suffice. That's question number 1, but that's what the Gemara says. V'dvarei emet. So says the Orach Chaim with respect to that piece of Gemara, what they're saying is true. Ela shenira li lasis tam tuv tam, but maybe I can give a better reason, or another reason. But with respect to that piece of Gemara, ki hakasav atzmo nasan tam hadavar. You're looking for explanations, for reasons. Why does the Torah tell us to put it on our left hand? The Torah tells us why we wear Tefiillin. Why? Ki bechozek yad. The Torah writes explicitly to remind us that God took us out with a strong hand. And in the bold. Ki yesh b'chal ladas. You should know. Ki ha'adon baruch hu yesh b'midosav beis bechinos. God has, I translated here, 2 forms of traits, which is not good English, but 2 different types of midos, however you want to translate it. Ha'echad tikra yad hagidola. One is the yad hagidola, the great hand. V'ha'echad tikra yad hachazaka. and the other is called the mighty hand. What are these two things? So Hayad HaGidola, the great hand, Hitzad HaChesed VeHatov. That is the side of chesed, of kindness, and tov, of good. V'hayad HaChazaka Hi HaGvura. And the Yad HaChazaka is strength, HaMishalemes Le'osei Ra Kira'asa, which repays, which punishes the Rishaim for the evil acts that they do. Okay. God acts in two different ways. God has, so to speak, two different hands, metaphorically speaking. Lahavdil. That was the word this week, right? I noticed that. See, I read the email very carefully. Vihine. I'm hoping that something I say in this year is going to be next week's word. That's my plan. Okay. Vihine be'otzas Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. When the Jewish people get taken out of Egypt. Nitei Hashem yad ha'chazaka. What hand of God does He employ? Well, what do we say? Yad ha'chazaka, twice in the parsha. Ki bechozek yad hotzianu Hashem miMitzrayim. V'hika sonav eser makos, and God attacks His enemies with 10 plagues. Asher lezeg mar omer ha'adon shetia hanachas Tefiillin b'ksiva sikaron biyad kehei. And this is why the Torah commands us to put Tefiillin on our weaker hand, our weaker arm. Shehi dugmas yad hachazaka, because the left arm, the weaker arm, parallels the strong arm of God. Hamotzio son miMitzrayim, which took us out of Egypt. V'zeh shamar hakasav kan ki b'chozek yad v'nachon. And this is exactly what we're trying to say, that God took us out with a chozek yad. So this is very strange. At first glance, this is very difficult to understand. Says the Or Chaim, in summary, God has two hands. God has the Yad HaChazaka, and God has, as we see in the Chumash, the Yad HaGedola. The powerful hand of God and the great hand of God. And the Torah states explicitly twice in this commandment of Tefiillin, and it is a reminder that God took us out with His strong hand, the Yad HaChazaka. So, says the Or Chaim, it follows that you would put Tefiillin on the left arm, which is the weaker, as a reminder of God using His stronger arm. So does that make any sense?
No.
You would think it would be the opposite.
No, it's the right side is chesed, the left side is gvura, and it's just kabbalistically that's just what it is.
So
Because the chesed is strong.
there's that piece that's missing, but clearly what the Or Chaim is driving at here is, I think, very similar to two models of Yiras Hashem. So what is Yiras Hashem? Yiras Hashem is a very tricky thing to define. Yira is fear. Vayiru am es Hashem, vayiminu Hashem. They feared God. But fear is unfortunately not the best word to translate Yira. Because we find both in the sources in the original text of the Chumash and in Tefiillin and things like that, you find the term Yira being used not really in the context of fear.
Right.
Oh.
And because Yira has a broader definition, even when it does mean fear at times, that's not really fair, because Yira is a more general umbrella term that covers other things as well. So to highlight these two models of Yira, and if anyone has a better word for it, by all means, but to highlight these two, we're going to look at a piece from the Mesilas Yesharim in source 6.
She's saying
To see Hashem. Lir'ot,
So
lir'ot.
maybe is a good word, maybe. Let's see. Yiras ha'onesh, says the Mesilas Yesharim. Yiras ha'onesh kipshuta sha'adam yare me'avar espi Hashem elokav. Fearing punishment is simply that a person is afraid to transgress the word of God, mipnei ha'onshim asher la'averos, because there are consequences to sin. That's what we believe. Im laguf, im lanefesh. Sometimes those consequences are physical, sometimes those consequences are spiritual, the world to come, etc. But either way, we're afraid of the consequences of sin. V'hinei zos kal. He says this is very easy. Vale ki kol adam ohev es atzmo, my favorite line in the paragraph, every man loves himself. And if you love yourself, v'yira lanafsho, and you're afraid for your own soul, v'ein davar sheyarchik aso mi'asos davar echad yoser min hayira. So nothing will motivate man more than fear. I want to protect my body, I want to protect my wealth, I want to protect my family, I want to protect my spirituality, whatever it is. So I'm not going to cross that line. It's not worth the risk. If you have a belief that there are consequences to Averos, and you really believe it, which is maybe not so simple, so then you're surely not going to transgress. Not because of any other pure, higher motivation, but simply because it's not worth it. That's easy. And he says this is not something that we should strive for. He says no one likes to be punished, but that's not the best way for us to live our lives. So that's Yira number 1, Yiras ha'onish. Number 2, onto the second page. Hamin Habez, the second form of Yira is Yiras haromimus, which is awe of the greatness of God. V'hu she'ha'adam yirchak min ha'chatayim. This too causes a person to distance himself from sin. V'lo yaseh mipnei kvodo hagadol yisbarach shemo. He doesn't do these sins because of the greatness of God. Why? Ki eich yekal. Very powerful. How will you ease up? How will you slack off in the face of God? O eich ye'arev libo shal basar v'dam shafel v'nimas, a lowly human being, lasos tavar neged ritzono shal abore yisbarach v'yisal SHMOT. How will you slap God in the face? Who do you think you are? V'hine zos hayira eina kol kach kala lahasigosa. Sounds simple in interpersonal relationships, but when it comes to relationship with God, maybe that's not so obvious. Kilo solid elamitoch yedia v'haskala lehisponin aromuso yisbarach. Where do you develop that kind of relationship with God? That requires contemplation. That requires an understanding of how great God is relative to man. And if a person has that understanding, then they can ask themselves these questions. How could I be doing this? Who do I think I am? But it's not so obvious. It's not so easy. These are all functions or results of a person's intellectual capability. This is interesting. So he says when comparing these two models, what he calls Yiras ha'onish and Yiras harumas, fear of punishment, and the awe of God's greatness, he says, when do you experience Yiras ha'chet? Anytime you're confronted with the opportunity to sin. You make a cost-benefit analysis, and you say, well, what will I gain from eating X, Y, or Z, from doing X, Y, or Z? Z, sorry. I catch myself still. What will you gain from doing it, and what will you lose from God's perspective if you can gamble? It's for the American viewers. Yeah. So you have to make that gamble. Every time you're confronted with sin, that's a decision you have to make. And when are we confronted with the challenge of Yiras haromimus, of the awe of God's greatness? So it says in Mesilas Yesharim, not as often as you would think. Because even these holy people that contemplate that kind of relationship with God, that's not what they're thinking when they're driving in their cars. He says when you come to shul, when you're davening, when you're reflecting on what's happened last week and what you're planning on for next week, 6 o'clock in the morning, if you're up that early, so then that's a time when you can think to yourself, how is my relationship with God? Is it where I want it to be? That's idealistic, but it's not always so accessible. When you come to daven, when you come to learn Torah, so then these are questions you can evaluate, but these aren't the kinds of relationships with God that we evaluate throughout the day. Yeah?
You say though when you face the challenge of an aver, yes or no, or cost benefit, part of the decision making is hurting the relationship with Hashem?
True.
So does that fit into...
Interesting. Very true. Now think about it. It's a good point. He seems to make the contrast here. he seems to think that that kind of relationship with God is more challenged in spiritual peaks rather than more than when facing Avera. But that's interesting. I hear what you're saying. And then he says, Hi ha'yira meshubachas nishtabku ba chasidei olam. This is the yira. When you see the word yira about the relationships that these great sages have had with God, that's what we're talking about. V'hu ma'aseh Moshe medaber v'omer. This is when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks in Sefer Dvarim Perek Chav Ches, and he says, what does God ask from you? Liras Hashem hanichbad v'hanora hazeh is Hashem lokecha. To fear this great name of God. So what does that mean, to fear this great name of God? It doesn't mean to be afraid that if I mess up, He's going to punish me. So this is one example. This notion of two forms of yira appears everywhere. All of the Sifrei Machshava, all of the books of Jewish philosophy, you will find this distinction. King David, we're going to get to in the next source, King David says, Gilu virada, in Tehillim. Rejoice before God in yira. How can you rejoice before God with fear? So that's obviously not what it means. So yira is a tricky term, but yira means both of these things. Yira encompasses both fear of God and a recognition of God's greatness, which is maybe more difficult and maybe to a certain extent more limited, but also a higher level of relationship with God. Okay. So with going back to the Or HaChaim, he seems to be saying the following, that God has two ways in which He can relate to man. He can relate to man through punishment, through yiras hachet, or He can relate to you through yiras haromimos, or He can relate to you through experiences of God's greatness. And when you contrast, going back to what Rafal said, when you contrast the experiences in Mitzrayim, these 10 plagues, in Kriyas Yamsuf, you have that exact dichotomy. The Mitzrayim were punished. The Mitzrayim experienced Yiras Hachet. They experienced a God that has consequences, where the cost outweighed the benefit. That they thought they were making all this money off having this convenient, this slave nation living within them, but in reality, they got punished more. That, says the Or HaChaim, is not the great hand of God. The Yad HaChazaka is powerful. The Yad HaChazaka comes with consequences, and it follows through, and it evens that field, that cost-benefit. But that is not God's greatest hand, even if it's God's strongest card. So he leaves out that blank. But what the Or HaChaim is saying is very beautiful. And the Or HaChaim says that the Yad HaChazaka, this powerful, mighty hand of God that inflicted 10 punishments, 10 plagues on the Egyptian people as a result of the mistreatment of their Jewish slaves, that is God's first revelation in Yetzias Mitzrayim. That is impressive, but not that impressive. So God is very strong. So God can be a bully, if you want to say. That's nice. That's scary. But that's only Yiras Hachet. What the Jewish people apparently are seeing at Kriyas Yamsuf is God's more impressive hand. They're seeing the Yad HaGedolah. They're seeing Rachamim. They're seeing mercy. They're seeing compassion. They're seeing their salvation. And that is something that inspires them on a whole new level. Now what the Or HaChaim leaves out here is actually filled in, I think unintentionally, by the Beis Halevi in Source 7. The Beis Halevi is Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik. And if that name sounds familiar, that's because he is the great-grandfather of Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, who was the Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University. Now, Rabbi Soloveitchik's namesake, his great-grandfather. So his grandfather was also pretty famous, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, and his great-grandfather, his namesake, Rabbi Yosef Dov. So his sefer on Chumash is called the Beis Halevi, and he addresses this very same question. I heard, has everyone heard the story of the woman who comes to the rabbi with milk before Pesach and asks if you can make the bracha on the 4 cups? So I always assumed, I'm admitting this on tape, I always assumed that, I think that story was with Rav Chaim, the Rav Yosef Soloveitchik's grandfather, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. I was told today that was the Beis Halevi. That was actually Rav Chaim's father. Both of them were known for tremendous acts of chesed within their community, even though future generations remember them for their incredible style of Torah study, which is very interesting. So for those who haven't heard the story, so this woman comes to the Beis Halevi and says that she comes with milk, and she wants to know on Pesach, which also relates to this topic, if she can use milk to make the blessing on the 4 cups of wine for the Seder. And the Beis Halevi provided her not only with wine but with chicken and or meat, whatever it was. And the students asked him, if she came and asked, why did you give her, clearly she didn't have wine for Pesach, why did you give her chickens also? And he said, a woman who can't afford wine for her table probably can't afford meat either.
I thought it was the milk, because she said milk, then obviously she had no chicken.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's what I know.
So that story in itself is an interesting one, but that story, again, either originates with Rav Chaim or with his father, Rav Yosef Dov, was the Beis Halevi in source 7. The Beis Halevi is a much longer piece. We only have a short segment of the Beis Halevi here, but just to highlight a little bit more in depth what this Yad HaGedola that the Jewish people witnessed at Kriyas Yamsuf. V'hinei, he says, Lefi Hamosko Harishon, at first glance, Hayanira Asher Yisponin Ha'adam B'midas Hadin. If you would look at God from the perspective of judgment, Midas Hadin, Yesh Lipol Olav Yira, then you would be scared. Then you would realize there are consequences, there are rules with which the game is played. Aval B'hisponino B'midas Harachamim, but if you would look at God's trait of mercy, of Rachamim, V'achesed Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so what would result? If you realize how great God was and how much God provided for you and how wonderful He was and how generous He was, would you be afraid of God? No, just the opposite. Yisorer belibo la'avalo yisbarach shemo. A person would be inspired to love God. Aval yira lechora lo shayachas. But yira, fear, awe, would seem to be inappropriate at that time. Which I think, so far what he's saying is very logical. Aval biyam, but at Kriyas Yamsuf, at the splitting of the sea, Ra'u godel ha'onesh shehigia leMitzrayim al yedei midas v'hanhagas harachamim. The Jewish people witnessed the great punishment that the Egyptians received through God's trait of mercy. V'hisponenu, and they understood, shelo k'midas basar v'dam, midaso yisbarach. That the midos, the attributes, the traits of God are not the same as the traits of human beings. The etzlo, when it comes to God, hakol echad. Mercy and judgment, rachamim and din, are all one and the same. Like the Beis Halevi said, it was a punishment that resulted from mercy. Hakol echad upoel rachamim b'din v'din b'rachamim. Rachamim and din work hand in hand. V'hevinu asher gam b'hisponin b'midas harachamim shayich yira. And at the sea, the people finally understood that within the mercy of God there is also yira. They achieved this higher level. Just like King David writes, V'gilu birada, that we should rejoice in fear, in trepidation. V'darshu chazal, and the Gemara explains in Yuma, B'makom kila sham tehei ra'ada, where should there be true trepidation of God's greatness? In our greatest moments of happiness. Which may seem counterintuitive, but is indeed a higher form of yira. V'zeh hemshech ha'pasuk. So now says the Beis Halevi very beautifully. Vayosha Hashem es Yisrael. Look at this verse that in source number 3. Vayosha Hashem bayom hahu es Yisrael miyad Mitzrayim. What is God's primary focus? Like Rafal said in verse 30. What is God's primary focus? He's not punishing Egyptians. God's focus is to save His children. Vayosha Hashem bayom hahu es Yisrael miyad Mitzrayim. Vishuv, says the Beis Halevi, and what followed? Vayar Yisrael sayara gdola asher asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim. It starts out, he says, Tibehaschala haya ikar hayeshua Yisrael. first, they don't see vengeance, they don't see punishment, they don't see power. The Jewish people witness salvation. And only after that, Vayar Yisrael Se'er Gdolah Asher Asher Hashem B'Mitzrayim. Ki mi Yeshua Asan, from their salvation, Yatsa Onesh Gadol She'asa Hashem L'Mitzrayim. Through their salvation, there was also punishment. Everything is happening all at once. There is no contradiction. There are no good days and bad days for God, days when He's happier and days when He's angry. Everything happens in one fell swoop. Mercy and judgment, salvation and plagues, all at once. Vayiru ha'ames Hashem de'ad ashav b'Mitzrayim lo yadu mizeh. All this time, all these plagues that they witnessed, they had no idea what context these plagues were being presented. So God was violent, God was powerful, not so impressive. So we'll behave when He's looking. They didn't understand what was going on. Aval mikan ve'ilech hayu yiraim es Hashem. Only from this point forward did they truly fear God, or were they truly in awe of God. So this is a combination of the words of the Or HaChaim and the words of the Beis Halevi.
And also in the future they cannot say they didn't see that. That's why we get punished too.
True. Question?
I have a question. So the 80% that didn't come out of Egypt, right? They had only seen the punishment. They had only seen that side of Hashem. Which is maybe why they didn't want to come out, because it was a very negative God. Perhaps if they started with the other, the kindness, more would have come out of Egypt.
So I think what you're asking is a very powerful question. If the Jewish people hadn't been exposed, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but hopefully I'm saying it right. If the Jewish people hadn't been exposed to this understanding of God, why would they want to go? Or what were they expecting from God when they stood at the feet of Har Sinai? It's not so obvious. We say, hey, shouldn't they be impressed? Isn't this something they should want? How much chesed did they see? What was the chesed? God said, if you paint the doorposts with blood, I won't kill your children also. But I think one way to begin answering that question is also to ask, what was God expecting? Was God expecting them to have the Yiras Haromimus? Were they supposed to be on this tremendous level where they understood that everything that God did was for a reason, was L'tov?
Really?
Or not? Or were they expected to say, this is something we can commit to? This is a bit of a tangent, but for those who read Rabbi Akiva Tatz, so he, in all of his books, I think, I was looking up, in every book he has the same, just about, this notion of emunah. Emunah means faith, right? But just like yira, faith is just as fear is a bad translation for yira, faith is a bad translation for emunah. And he talks about the idea that Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayhi Yadav Emunah Bo Hashamish, right? When the Jewish people fight Amalek, and Moshe keeps his hands up so the Jewish people will have faith in God. So some of the Mefarshim take that route. What does it mean that Moshe's hands were Emunah Bo Hashamish? So it means they were sturdy. They provided emunah for the people. But Rav Tatz says simply, emunah means sturdiness. It means commitment. It doesn't mean you believe it. It doesn't mean that you understand right now in the depths of all the terrible things that are going on that no, things are wonderful. That's not what it means. It means that I don't really get what's going on, and I'm not so thrilled about painting blood on the doorposts, but I'm going to do it because I believe in the cause. I'm committed to the cause. And the question is, what was the expectation of the people? Maybe they didn't have a full understanding of God. Maybe they wouldn't until after they received the Torah. But whatever minimal expectation there was, those groups weren't achieving. Maybe.
So the 80% that didn't leave did not have that commitment to God.
Whatever, again, I don't know what that commitment was. Whatever minimal expectation. Whether it was Bris Milah and Karban Pesach at bottom, or there was more to it, I don't know. But there was some gap between these groups, and neither group had really experienced God at His fullest.
But why would they stay with the wicked who treated them so badly?
But why would they follow
Hey, a lot of the
punishment, right?
Well, He wasn't punishing them.
Exactly. Still, the God
I mean, He may be,
punishes the negative.
excuse me, Lahavdil again, but he's not bullying me. A lot of people are friends with bullies.
And he could.
Sorry,
And
hands up.
I just like, wanted to address like what you were saying about like a God of punishment, and like the chesed, like if a person looked a little bit, the chesed that was done for them in Egypt, like it starts at the beginning of Shemos explaining how Hashem like gives such a bracha to the people that they, even under all the hardship, were given, like they gave birth to 6 children at once, like, and none of them died, and they were healthy and they lived, and Hashem took care, like the amazing things that happened, and the idea that like the cattle of the Jews, like nothing was touched in all of these plagues, like there's so much chesed to see there that like I don't know, I don't see it as being so punishment. Like it's the same thing. Like they weren't.
What about all the children that died?
There's a commentary that says that those children were kept in the fields and taken care of by malachim, and none of them ever died, and they were reunited with all the Jews after.
But they had a horrible resistance as slaves.
No, they were dead.
You know what, we have to be really careful about, I think we have to be really careful about saying that God should have done something differently. I think this was a challenge. This is what we all live with every day of our lives. We can can wait for everything to be perfect in our lives and say we're only going to believe in Hashem when everything is wonderful in our lives.
No,
or
not at all.
after a full year.
But you cannot deny like all this tzarot that we're going through.
This is a year later. It's a year of
Okay, what about now? Why we need to go to Egypt? We always have tzarot. We always in the context to survive.
Exactly.
And this is some understand it and some don't. But
that's our
there is also a
you cannot
distinction.
deny that we are.
There is also a distinction that we can make between things that happen, we call nisim gluyim and nisim nistarim, things that happen in the open and things that obviously what was going on was to a certain extent supernatural. Were those things as revealing as the makos? Were those things as revealing as Kriyas Yamsuf? Maybe not. But it's true that there was Chesed Mitzrayim also.
Isn't it possible that perhaps Amun was destroyed? But that's the question I have. Perhaps Amun was destroyed.
So we talked about 2 weeks ago with Rav Moshe Feinstein's approach to what the Jewish people were holding on to their whole time in Mitzrayim. And interesting there, maybe we should have discussed it there more, he uses that term emunah also. That they had a certain faith, and what did that reflect itself in? Small things. Not changing their names, not changing their clothes, those kind of ideas. And he says it wasn't the actions themselves, but it was the motivation behind those actions that justified them being taken out. That they said, you know, we want to look Jewish, we want to look like there's still something for God to take out. And there was still some faith. And Rav Moshe himself, we're going to get to a little bit more from Rav Moshe Feinstein, but he himself says, were they doing circumcision, for example, which is a very important mitzvah? No. Because when it came time for Korban Pesach, what did they say? We can't do this until everyone gets circumcised. Were they doing all these things? Were they learning Torah? They didn't have Torah. So what were they doing that was Jewish? He said very little. They created some kind of superficial, external Jewish experience, but there was faith that motivated it.
It was incredible to do that. And
Absolutely.
I had no idea what it's like to be in such circumstances.
For so many years, you forget it was, even if it wasn't 400 years.
And we were taken out, we would have gone to the 49th level.
Who knows?
We
Absolutely.
were at the 48th level.
49.
40 went from 49.
So-
I don't even have a comprehension of what that means. I have to even someone that to hold on to anything that's Jewish is
Absolutely.
is a miracle.
So it just food for thought to finish up this idea. If you look in davening tomorrow when you get to being geula l'tefillah, look at that verse. V'yamsuf lahem pakata v'zedim tibata. 2 separate clauses, one after the next. Fits exactly what the Beis HaLevi says. V'yamsuf lahem pakata. Yamsuf was an experience for them, for the Jewish people. V'zedim tibata, that is just a consequence. That the Egyptians happened to have experienced punishment at that exact same time. But Kriyas Yamsuf was salvation. And that was something that throughout Mitzrayim, in this magnitude, the Jewish people had never seen.
So what do we do with the measure for measure punishment of the Egyptians at the sea? I thought we understand that each one was punished depending on their level of evil, and some floated and some. That seems like there was a punishment aspect
There for sure, again, what's nice about the Beis Halevi's piece is that there was absolutely punishment. What he says maybe more than I would have said for the Or Chaim. I would have said, hey, the Kriyas Yamsuf was salvation, that's impressive, that's inspiring, that creates faith in God. But the Beis Halevi goes a step further and he says it's not just that it was salvation, it's not just that it was Rachamim, but that within the Rachamim there was room for punishment. There was punishment within this experience, which again through our tefillah we see was primarily was a merciful action. It wasn't like the 10 plagues. It was saving the Jewish people from their enemies. Directed at them, not at the Egyptians. And at the same time, says the Beis Halevi, that doesn't mean there can't be punishment. It doesn't mean that when things are bad, God can't be doing good. They witnessed at one time both of these things simultaneously. And that specifically, according to Beis Halevi, what was so inspiring about that moment.
There's the exactitude as well.
Well, that goes also, I think there's a medrash there about Yisro, Yishma Yisro. What did Yisro hear? Yisro hears Mida, connected Mida. Everything happened so precisely, couldn't believe it. There's no coincidence. This is not just Jewish people getting their way out of a problem. There's a higher force. That's also true. One last comment very quickly in the last few minutes that we have. And I think there's much more to discuss about this message from the Or Chaim. But Rav Moshe Feinstein addresses this question about the Tefiillin. Why Tefiillin are on the left hand, which we're saying is physically the weaker of the two hands. And again, like we pointed out, he asks that question, what do you do for the lefties, that it's not parallel to their heart, so obviously that answer is insufficient. So Rav Moshe says an idea which I think is highlighted by that, I don't know if it's a true story or that famous story about the school that puts on the Shabbos play, and they dress up the kids in the class, and some of the kids will be children, and one of the kids will be the father, and one of the kids will be the mother, and they put on a whole play for the parents, or whatever they do, and they dress up. There's a Hasidic school, I guess, so they put the kid in like fancy Shabbos clothes and a little shtreimel, and he sits down at the front of the table, and he kind of slouches back in his chair, and he says in Yiddish, oh, what a hard week. Heard that story? I don't know. But the idea that, and Rav Moshe speaks about this a lot, I believe, and the idea that when we approach mitzvos in Yiddishkeit, we're supposed to approach them not only from the perspective of education, but also for ourselves, to approach them with a certain amount of happiness and an excitement, and not coercion, or yiras ha'onesh, if you will, fear of that we have no other choice. And what Rav Moshe talks about here is the relationship between the strong hand. He's assuming again that the right hand is the stronger hand and the left hand is the weaker hand. And he says the idea is that Tefiillin on our hand is supposed to symbolize action, things that we do. And he says you can take two approaches to the things that you do. Some things come easy, they come natural. Actions that we do with our right hand are simple. Those are things that we can do. It's not so difficult. You want me to write my name down with a pen with my right hand? No problem. Ask me to do it with my left hand, no one's going to be able to make it out. So God asks you to act, but sometimes God asks you to act with your left hand rather than your right. Some things don't come so easy. And says Rav Moshe, those are the primary challenge for us, to embrace those opportunities with happiness and with excitement, and not just with the feeling that we have no choice, we have to do them. And Rav Moshe says, how do you gain that approach to mitzvos? It's not just from doing mitzvos. You're not going to get better with your weaker hand. He says you have to have the right mentality. And he said that's the balance between the Tefiillin Shal Yad and the Tefiillin Shal Rosh. There has to be something in your head. There has to be a mentality that what I'm doing is important. And Rav Moshe says so beautifully, when it's something that matters, when it's something that's important, it doesn't matter how hard it is, you find a way to get it done. Yeah. And I'll read you a beautiful, I think, psychological insight from Rav Moshe Feinstein here. He says, we need to strengthen ourselves when we're only acting in a weak way. When people are depressed and when they're struggling. When a person is out of it, kol mitzvah balo b'koshi. Every mitzvah he wants to do is so difficult to do. V'af shelo eino mevin, and he says, I'm going to sit and learn Torah, but nothing is clicking. He has no idea what he's learning. When he realizes the centrality of Torah in his life, and he strengthens himself, and he doesn't get depressed. Even when he's sick, even there it can be so easy. And we know this ourselves. It's our mindset when we go into mitzvahs. If we're excited for those mitzvahs, if we're ready to do it, it doesn't matter how hard, we'll find a way. But if we don't want to be there, if someone's pushing us into the room and sitting us down in that chair, it's going to go in one ear and out the other. So says Moshe, yeah, God took us out biyad chazakah, but God performed tremendous feats for us, and we have a responsibility, and he develops this more, midah keneged midah, to always approach those things that seem like they're impossible with the attitude that they're not as impossible as we think that they are. That if God wants me to do this, I can do this. If it's with my right arm tied behind my back, I'll do it with my left. And if you have that Tefiillin shel rosh mentality, even the weaker hand can be the Yad HaChazaka. Okay.